Jig night. Let's go, folks. Just like that. You ready? What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Jig Squad. I am Mike Murphy, otherwise known as Barracuda. If this is your first time to Jig Squad, I appreciate you tremendously for tuning in. If you're watching on replay, just as good as live, but live gets the chat. So for everyone who's a regular on Jig Squad, I'm super excited tonight. And then for all the guys out on the East Coast that are a big follower of Tinman Tackle, I'm super excited to have Dan Brodzinski on tonight, the proprietor of Tinman Tackle. And I got to tell you, I'm going to bring Dan in right away here because I don't like to wait. But I appreciate everyone being here. And I'm going to get Dan in right away, and we're going to just get at it because we're talking jigs tonight. So, Danny, here you are. Welcome to Jig Squad, buddy. How are you?
Good to see you, Mike. I'm well. Thank you.
So, Dan, allow me to goad a little bit here as we get started, okay? There'll be a lot of regulars popping in. I'm just saying hello to a few people as we get going that are the regulars: Chris, Matt, Sean, Dave Richardson, Gator, Anthony, Darius, Bassman Malone, Darkfish Tackle, Jay. What's going on, guys? And I know we'll have more coming in the chat as we go. Andrew, what's going on, buddy? All right, so guys, listen. So Dan from Tinman Tackle. Let me explain this, right? So I'm a big believer in people having a chance to tell their story, particularly when it comes to the jig scene and designers from around the country, even the world, right? And there's a lot of great people out there, but there's people that just captivate me because of their story and who they are and what they do. And Dan Brodzinski from Tinman Tackle, if you ask any of these guys from the East Coast particularly, especially in the striper scene, they'll tell you that this guy makes one of the best bucktails in the game. And it makes other things too. But how I was drawn to it, and a little shout out to the Stripers Online crew, just from watching Stripers Online, reading articles over the years, Dan's name just keeps coming up, kept coming up. And I'm like, and I would watch his stuff. I'm like, it's fantastic stuff. And I'm like, how many times has anyone had Dan Brodzinski or Tinman Tackle on a podcast? There's a lot of podcasts out there. And I'm not, whether it be Saltwater Edge is doing stuff, every guy out on the East Coast, there's so much stuff out there now. And Dan hasn't been on any podcast. So what did it take, Dan? It took the guy from Chicago to get you on to start talking jig making and what does flow, color, and design mean when we're making jigs. So Dan, I am so honored to have you on, buddy. And I'm so excited for you to be able to tell your story tonight and talk about jig design and all of that. So tell us a little bit about you. What's your background? How long have you been making jigs for? Just give us the intro.
Basically, I grew up in a house where surf fishing was the second language.
Okay.
All right. My father was a pretty crafty guy. He used to make a lot of his own tackle. My first fishing rods were all built by him. This is back in the day when nobody did that. Nobody.
Sure.
Over the years, especially when I was a kid, I would make a lot of my own bass poppers from balsa wood or bottle corks whenever I could. I started making spinners for the same reason. Went into service, got married, had kids. All that got put on the wayside for a while. But it was always with me, always stayed with me.
Okay.
And eventually, basically the late 80s, early 90s, I was getting back to the fishing. I was making shad darts for shad fishing,
okay.
American shad. And I got tired of tying all those bucktails on them. And the thought occurred to me, why can't this be easier? And with a hammer and chisel, I created a couple of barb-like indentures, let me put it that way, in
sure.
the mold. And
primitive.
Primitive, but it worked. And I was putting plastic twister tails on.
Okay.
It worked just as well as the bucktail. And then I discovered those things will catch just about anything. One year I had 20 different kinds of fish on those things. Mm-hmm. And I started fishing them in the surf for fluke. Some guys know it as flounder, but it's, the same summer flatfish up and down the East Coast.
Sure.
And it was very effective. In the mid 90s, I noticed a couple of molds turned up on the Cabela's catalog. They were made by Do It. One of them was the wobble jig. Okay. I tried a couple of those and they were incredibly effective. I couldn't believe how many fluke I used to catch with those things. I still do, for that matter. But that kind of started the whole thing. I started selling shad darts, and then the wobble jigs, and that just kept expanding from there.
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny how we get started, right, Dan? Like I tell the story a lot that for me, being a Midwestern guy and fishing the salt when I have the chance, it started out simply, right? I've been pouring jigs for, I tell people, 25 to 30 years now. And it started out pouring tube jigs and then ball head jigs. And that's what we had used for on the Great Lakes, chasing smallmouth and then chasing bass and walleye in the rivers, right? But that's how it started. It didn't start with all this tying and hair jigs and skirted jigs and all these other styles. But I mean, you kind of brought up a good point. Like, whether and I tell this all the time on the show, Danny, it doesn't matter whether you're a jig maker or you just love the game, right? And you're a jig user. You should always pay attention to what people talk about and how designers do things, because there's a lot to learn about what's out there and the different types of jigs that you either make yourself or buy, and the reasons why things are designed the way they do. And that's partly why Jigsquad started, is because I kind of feel that, everyone likes the next shiny penny, right? And fit and function becomes an important thing, so that's kind of why I like talking about these things. All right, so the wobble jig, let's talk about that a little bit, because the wobble jig is something, and I don't care whether it's fresh or salt, it's an underutilized jig, and the action on it is like nothing else, right? Talk about the wobble jig a little bit, because I just think wherever you're at in this country, you should know that there are actions to certain jigs that are just, supreme. They're next level. And a wobble jig is one of them. So talk about that a little bit.
Just so everybody knows what we're talking about here.
Yeah, I'll make you big here too, Dan.
This is a wobble jig. Okay. You can see the wild curve in it.
Yep.
I don't know this for sure, but I've always believed this was intended originally for walleye. Like I say, it works very well in saltwater. The only drawback was this was the biggest size, 3/8 of an ounce.
Yeah.
I decided, okay, if that works well, I need something bigger. This is the 5/8 and the 1/8 ounce, 1 ounce. I don't know how well you can see these.
No, we could see them. Yeah.
To the best of my knowledge, I'm the only guy that makes these two sizes.
You know what I was going to say, Dan? I think that Dua mold only goes up to 3/8 of an ounce.
That's correct.
See, look at that thing.
And you keep fooling around with things and fooling around. And I took it another step further. And you can see there's a hole in the front.
Oh, yeah.
And the hook eye is missing. This thing wobbles like crazy. And I've never sold it.
Dan, that's almost like a version that does things like a chatterbait almost. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Like, in theory, that's what it is. With that curvature of it is naturally going to cause it to shimmy back and forth. Maybe not as violently as a chatterbait, but But oh my goodness, look at that thing. And it's so simple.
Yeah.
Why haven't you put that out?
I got too many other things going on. You look at my website and there's so many things on there, and even that isn't everything that I make. And I'm getting ready to introduce 2 more items.
It's Surf Day coming up, right?
At Surf Day, yeah. One is going to be a finished product, and the other one is in the advanced prototype stage. Let me put it that way. it's at the point where I know it works, and it's going to be a case now of having molds made to do it.
That's awesome. Well, hey, listen, isn't that one part of the experience that knowing that it works is key, right?
Oh, absolutely. If it doesn't
That's
work, you
great.
can't sell it.
I saw Dan. I saw some of the guys. I saw some of the guys on Striper online, and one of the threads had somebody was asking about, like, you would kind of tip people off a little bit, saying like there's some new things coming. It's surf day, and nothing excites a fisherman, right? That more than knowing that something new is coming, right? New
Well,
toys, new toys.
the analogy I always use is that fishermen are like gamblers. We live in perpetual hope.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because Dan, we just had a show here in the Chicago area out in Schaumburg. And it was a good show. It was last weekend. And then I go and look at this lineup for the guys out on the East Coast for this surf day. And I just look at the list and I'm going down and I'm like, oh my goodness, look at all these companies. Like, one of these times, I'm just going to have to, you know what I'm going to have to do? I'm just going to have to get in the car and I'm just going to have to come out to the East Coast and hang out for one of these events just to experience it, because the amount of like next level or custom vendors that are out there for these things, it's so cool. And I wish I was closer to you guys, but I think it's going to be a fun event. It's coming up, what, the 17th or something, right, Dan?
The 18th of this month, yes.
18th of this month.
Yeah. Put on by the Jersey Shore Surfcasters.
Yeah, Tom Morehouse, I know you're asking me, am I going to Bedford Sales Show this weekend? I am not going to be there. I'm coaching my son. He's playing in soccer, and I'm coaching his team. So one of my boys, one of the Murphy boys, right? So that's pretty cool, Dan. So you got some new things coming. And the wobble jig, and I know when you and I have talked, you've said like one of your all-time favorite jigs, particularly for fluke or flounder, is a wobble jig, right? And funny enough, I know some guys down in Texas that talk about that too. And talking about fluke or flounder, the battle of the South versus the East Coast with that term, right? But they like that jig too. So I mean, what an interesting jig. I will tell you this, Dan. How am I going to say this? So, all I'm saying, if you are a smallmouth person from the Great Lakes region and you are not using a wobble jig, you should. That's all I'm going to say. It's a phenomenal jig. You could get them in the sizes that are typical for what the smallmouth guys in the Great Lakes will use. And look at now, here we are talking about it being used in the South. What are the two sizes you up from the 3/8? So the mold. The all-time classic mold has up to 3/8, and you're making them. And what were those two larger sizes, Dan?
5/8 and 1 ounce.
5/8 and 1 ounce, which is perfect for the surf, to be honest with you, right?
Yeah. If you need over 1 ounce in the surf, it's going to be tough catching fluke anyway.
Sure, I understand. Okay.
And interestingly enough, I get enough stripers on those things too. Just kind of as a bycatch.
It's just so interesting. I honestly think it's one of for the salt, and I'll say it this way: besides casting spoons, right? Besides stuff like this, which we're gonna get to and we're gonna talk about in a little bit, right? Besides stuff like this, more in the spoon category, what I call spoons or jigging spoons, whatever you want to call them, a wobble jig, and then the other one that I think gets a lot of movement in the surf, which you sell too. I think you do, right? The old school, I call them the butterbean type of heads for like the old school Upperman type of bucktails.
Yeah, I do make them. I don't sell them a lot, but I do make them.
Every once in a while you'll see a thread. Like I think in the last month or two, there was a thread maybe on stripers. I can't remember. I lose track, but you see somebody will bring it up and then you talk about it. I think guys get excited here and there and it comes and goes, right?
Yeah. To be honest, I found that particular thread educational because those guys knew a lot more about fishing those things than I did.
Yeah. Here's two questions too. All right. So Striper Hunter 2112 says, Dan, do you use a tactical angler clip with your wobble jig?
No, I use a dual lock style.
Just straight dual lock, but you are using some type of connector snap.
Yeah, I think you'd have trouble getting a TA clip on one of those.
Yeah, you probably would. It's like the frustration with the TA clip on like a concave face on a popper sometimes. You know, some are better than others or other applications. Like if you're using an SP minnow or some other thing, it's always I do like the TA clips. Here's another one. So South Jersey fisherman, whose name is Matt. Matt says, not entirely about jigs, but how does Dan like to rig 11-inch and 16-inch eel soft plastics? Interesting question.
Funny he should ask.
Funny he should ask.
The prototype that I mentioned earlier is one of the things that I'll be introducing at the Surf Day. Is exactly for that 11-inch eels, 11-inch plastic eels.
Matt, that was a great, it was almost, hey, Matt, it was like somebody paid you to throw that one in there, brother.
Yeah,
I think that was a great lead-in question. There's so much debate. There's so much debate on what type of head, and there's a lot of good stuff out there, unquestionably. But there's so much debate on guys are always looking for a good eel, a good plastic head to throw their eels on.
You know? There's another thing that works. It's got a lot of action, and I didn't realize it, but it was a Stripers Online person that put a short video on SOL. It's basically one of my GT squids, which have a swing hook on them instead of a fixed hook like a normal squid.
Yeah,
with an eel on it, and those things wiggle like crazy. I tested it myself.
Interesting.
So for South Jersey fishermen, that's another possibility for them.
Yeah. So JP Harrell says, does Dan tip those jigs with bait or plastic when using those wobble jigs for fluke?
Definitely. My first choice would be gulp, like 4-inch
tail,
4-inch minnow.
Yeah, that 4-inch
go to a 5-inch, or just use any plastic twister tail and a little strip of squid. But you got to have something with mouth appeal. It definitely makes a difference.
Yeah, that's an interesting comment. So, it's hard. I honestly think that Berkeley 4-inch gulp mullet, call it a twister tail, whatever the heck you want. I think it's one of the best baits out there.
Oh, absolutely.
And then little strips of squid, like you talked about, like you can't go wrong anywhere. And to be honest with you guys, if you're a freshwater fisherman and you're chasing after coho or anything like that on the Great Lakes, squid is another a great little trailer to use for casting for cohos in the spring.
That's interesting. Well. I always thought about that. What would work in fresh water?
We actually funny enough, like I'll use the Berkeley 4-inch swimming mullet gulp from anything for casting for snook down in Florida. I did get a tarpon on it 2 summers back when I was casting down in Florida, but then also we throw them up here for coho. I use them in the rivers for smallie. It's a great bait, So let's see. David says like a spring that slides over the hook. I think the thing is those wobble jigs do have a pretty significant lead barb for a keeper, right? Did you design yours like that too, Dan, for those oversized?
Absolutely. Matter of fact, it may be too aggressive for some plastics. In that case, I just bend it down a little bit.
Yeah. It's funny because we're talking about this, and Larry Hadley, Dan, I'll have to show you some pictures someday of Larry Hadley's heads that he designs and some of his baits. He does some real intricate powder painting techniques that are super cool, but he's a flounder fluke guy. I'm afraid to say one over the other tonight because I don't know who's going to get me, the East Coast boys or the South boys. So I'm just going to say flounder - fluke.
I think we all understand.
Yeah, I know. Everyone should know. All right. So Okay, so that's great because we talked about the wobble jigs a little bit. And obviously I want to talk about some of the other types of jigs. But I mean, one of the hallmarks and one of my favorite things about Tinman Tackle, you guys. And listen, there's a link, you guys, for Tinman Tackle down in this description. And we're going to talk about it a little bit more, but there's a couple things. One, if you want pre-made bucktails, Dan sells bucktails on the site listed down below in the description on YouTube, right? But then in addition to that, if you're a jig maker and you want just bare heads and to make your own stuff, you really should be looking at some of that. We'll talk about that a little bit, right? But the first one, Dan, the first one I want to talk about is so Dan makes a weight forward head on the Ultra Minnow mold. All right. So everyone knows an Ultra Minnow. If you're not a jig maker, you classically know them as, you know, if you're a saltwater guy, you know them as some of the Spro styled heads. If you're a jig maker, you know them as the Ultra Minnow. But anyway, Dan has made quite a few of these. He makes a weight forward Ultra Minnow version, right? And the reason this is important, I'm going to let Dan talk about it a little bit. I'll hold this up, Dan. But Dan makes a weight forward version of the Ultra Minnow. So typically the eye placement is right here or here on the regular molded Do It Molds Ultra Minnow. And Dan has modified and he produces ones with a weight forward eye. So the most important part of all this is tell everyone why. Some people may know, a lot don't.
Yeah, the big revelation for me, it came from John Skinner. He's got a very high profile here on YouTube.
Sure.
Yeah, he's a great fisherman. I sat through one of his seminars and he mentioned that. And I spoke to him after, and it was, like I say, it was a great revelation. If you take a bucktail like this Ultra Minnow, it's funny, the image is reversed here, so I keep going in the wrong direction.
I know. I still can't get it right.
You can see how it hangs, okay? So that's basically a boat jig because it's a vertical presentation.
It's a vertical presentation, exactly.
Okay, if you're a surf guy or you're standing on the bank of a lake or a stream or something and you're throwing one of these things, let's rotate that with that same relationship to about a 15-degree angle. And you see how that head presents itself in the water. Granted, it's not going to be that extreme, but it's going to be somewhere close to that. Okay. If we go now.
And minnows don't swim like that.
No, they don't. They don't put their head down.
No, they don't.
If we go to the forward balance. Why am I getting fumble fingered here? Now, you see the forward balance, see how it hangs? Okay. Now, again, we change that to that approximate 15-degree relationship. And you see what you got? A much more level presentation. Much better at looking in the water. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. That pretty much applies to all jigs.
It really does. And that's why this concept is so phenomenal to me. So everyone who's out there listening, I want you to think about this in terms of not just whether you're throwing swim jigs, just we'll talk about swim jigs. Anytime you're swimming a bait, this is extremely important. And it does not mean that you can't go and swim a Spro bucktail. And actually, if I'm not mistaken, I think Spro even has weight forward designs now as well. But this should apply to any other type of fishing that you're doing. Like just a couple of comments here. I want to make sure I don't miss it. So Centaur Equestrians, of course, says Dan ties a mean and killer bucktail. Yes, he does. Right. Matt, South Jersey Fisherman, says, Dan, any plans on a smaller jig? Interesting question. Jigging peanuts for shallower tidal fisheries. What do you think, Dan?
You mean my peanut spoons?
probably the peanut bunker.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. The smallest that the commercial mold for that is 5/8 of an ounce.
5/8. Yeah.
Okay. However, there is an alternative. If you pour it in tin instead of lead, okay, you drop the weight by a third. Makes a big difference. Makes a difference in how it acts in the water too. It's got a lot more action. The only downside, tin is very expensive. It's almost $2 an ounce these days from commercial sources.
Yeah. That's a great comment, Dan, because one of the things, like, we'll talk about tin once in a while here. So basically it's about maintaining the same profile size, but being able to get different action in the water. And then because you're maintaining a similar sized volume to the bait or mass, it's just weighted less. And so a lot of guys will play around with that. If you see people that sell things in tin, it's worth playing around with, right? Because I don't think people just randomly put products out in tin unless there's some intended use behind them, right?
That's
So
correct.
just important to keep it on. So Dan, one of my buddies up in Wisconsin, who's a great company, Brian Tesh and his son Ben, he says, I have a use for that weight forward design. I bet you do. On the fly tackle. John Lee is saying Skinner is a Northeast legend. He sure the heck
Yeah,
is.
he is. Yeah.
What tremendously knowledgeable guy, and he's got great tutorials on YouTube. So if you haven't seen Skinner's stuff, everyone, if you're on the East Coast, you more than likely already know John Skinner. If you're not, you should look his stuff up. He's just got some amazing stuff. Hey, here's Dan. I just want to highlight some of the guys that come in. Dave DeHart, thanks for being in here tonight, bud. He's just saying Dan's bucktails are the best. Bigger profile, less weight, and in the big bush, and you've got a winning combination. Right. And Dave, what's interesting about that is everything, everything changes the fall rate when you're talking about volume of materials. And like here, we're gonna transition to the bullet. Dan, you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure.
Because
Absolutely.
so Dave makes mention of bulk and volume. Look at this baby. Look at that. It's beautiful. And now this, of course, is on one of Dan's new. How long has this head design been out, Dan?
It was new about the middle of last year.
Okay. And so you're not going to be able to pick up the exact differences here, but this was different than from your old bullet head version. In what ways?
The old bullet head version was basically the do it mold for bullet heads for soft plastic. All I did was change the collar. Okay, instead of barbs, I had the molds modified for a tying collar. There were certain drawbacks, certain things I didn't like. Number one, I've changed the profile in the front to get it a little more streamlined. Number two, I've gone to a much better tying collar. It's pretty much a copy of the Smiling Bill collars, and I've changed the hook. I like these 32824 Mustad hooks better than the old 34185s. It's got a bigger gap and a smaller barb, so it puts a smaller hole in the fish, and you lose fewer fish that way. The bigger gap was important to me too.
Yeah, that bigger gap is a big thing. And so just a couple of mentions too. I'm going to highlight a comment here in a second because I think it's actually great from Anthony guys. The other thing is too, guys, I want you to pay attention to what's going on here. You got to wait for design again. Okay. But here's another thing, Dan, I know you made mention of this. It's hard for me to exactly tell, but in a classic bullet head, you're going to have a head that, it's going to come forward and then round itself. The other thing with the head on this one, Dan, correct? It contours down a little bit and contours in. So it's a little bit more, I don't know how to say it, conical. Is that even the right?
Yeah, it's got a sharper radius.
It's got a sharper radius. Great description. And so basically, tell me where a jig like this is going to excel with this styled head as opposed to a weight forward ultra minnow. I know what you're going to say, but let's talk about this a little bit.
It's funny. Some guys that see that bucktail for the first time, the first word out of their mouth is Montauk.
Right.
Yeah, I mean it seriously. I showed one to Tim Sargent, the guy that owns Stripers Online, and that was the first word out of his mouth. Guys do like it in rocky ground.
Yeah.
They're a little less prone to getting hung up. All of that bucktail helps with that. The extreme weight forward hook eye position is part of that.
Yeah.
And it's just a good, successful jig.
Yeah. It's when would you say guys start talking about liking the Spros, weight forward Spros over a bullet head like this? What are those moments, or one where one's going to be picked over the other? Is it a preference thing at some point?
It may be a preference thing. Everybody's got their prejudices, me included.
Sure.
There's also a desire to match the hatch.
Right.
You know, that ultra minnow style shape, profile, whatever you want to call it, is pretty good. It's very distinctive.
Yeah.
I'm sure fish tend to zero in on it. The bullet style most commonly is used with a trailer of some sort. Plastic paddle tail, a twister tail, pork rind or otter tails, or one of those cow strips, one of those.
Sure.
It's almost mandatory with that.
Yeah, and guys, listen, this isn't a sale. I just want to say, like, if you're new around here, you'll figure this out real quick. If anyone was here, Greg, I see you popping in the chat. What's up, buddy? Malone, what's up, buddy? Hook Life. So the guys that are around know this. If you're new and this is your first time at Jig Squad, like I'm not here to sell nothing. Like that's not the game of Jig Squad. Like I do my own thing. I'm a high school educator by day and a jig maker. I don't sell stuff. I've been making jigs for, like I said, 25, 30 years. So I'm here to highlight. I'm in it for the game, the love of the game, and people telling these stories that, like, it blows my mind that people haven't had Dan Brodzinski on, some of these other podcasts, and they really should, and I don't know. It's just one of those things. I highlighted a comment here, Dan, and I just I thought it was important to highlight here. So Anthony Geist says, rumor has it, Dan went from playing the piano in the New York Symphony to tying jigs. Apparently, he was too good and needed a new challenge and started tying up jigs. I could see the correlation. Now, listen.
Before, that's what I was chuckling at.
Anthony doesn't get to make a comment like that, and we highlight it without you there's got to be a little bit of a story here. And I kind of want to hear it, because this is about the Dan Tinman Tackle story tonight, buddy. So what is this about, and what does this man know about you that we don't?
He doesn't. Basically, it's very simple, Mike. I've wanted to make tackle all my life.
Yeah.
As I approached retirement age, I fell into an opportunity. I bought out the assets of Able Lures. Okay, I'm the owner of that, but I don't push it very much.
Yeah.
And I just let the thing go in whatever direction it wanted to, and I just followed it. So I see my son is on here too.
Good for you. I kind of thought it was an important thing to highlight this comment here, right?
Yeah.
So look at even ice fishing. It's one of those things, Dan, like you said before, you're like, there's a lot, like I said, why is that not being sold? And you're like, there's a lot of things I make that, don't all come out, because there's just a lot of different things that you enjoy.
Yeah.
You enjoy making. You're a designer, right? So Dan, I have to ask you this question, because to me, this is a big deal. I know it seems silly, but one of the things, like, everyone always asks about these shirts. I have a friend that screen prints some stuff, and I had her make me some of these, for my own personal use. But one of the things with Jig Squad is I started Jig Squad because one of the themes of it was about why do people design the way they do? And what does flow, color, and design mean to them. So my motto with Jig Squad is flow, color, and design. And flow doesn't always have to mean just physical movement in the water. To me, a lot of flow is about how colors interact with each other and create what we're trying to do. Obviously, you could talk about profiles, amount of material, but if you add those three words when you are thinking about designing jigs, flow, color, and design, what order of importance do you put those three words in order? First being,
I never thought of it in those terms.
that's why you're here.
I just get an idea and I got to try it. A lot of my ideas, I'm not the originator of. I have to be very honest with you about that.
Okay.
The weight forward design, I'm not the originator. If I hadn't sat in that John Skinner seminar, I never would have thought of it that way. Okay. One of the very popular color combinations that I make is the ones I had before, the sea robin. So,
oh yeah, I got one of these here, Danny.
Streak of orange on the side. That's called the sea robin, right?
Yep.
That was requested by a fellow named Matt Farrell, who works for Daiwa right now, I think.
Oh yeah.
Another excellent fisherman. Yeah, that's it. That's been a very popular color combination for about 5 years or so now.
Interesting.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I use it not just on the ultra minnows. Here it is.
Yeah, I'll make you big again, Dan.
Here it is on a Sparky jig. Okay.
Oh yeah.
This is another possible fluke jig, especially in the surf.
That's beautiful.
There's a writer here in New Jersey named Nick Honachevsky. He really threw me for a loop. I was at Surf Day the first year I introduced these.
Okay.
And he happened to be doing a seminar about fluke in the surf that day.
All right.
All of a sudden, everybody's asking for these things at my booth. And I couldn't understand why until finally somebody told me. He held this thing up and said, that's the best fluke jig he ever used.
Of course.
And, things like that happen. They just happen by accident sometimes.
Yeah. And the thing is, there's different colors that people are really, drawn to. And the funny thing is, like, even though and I'm being assumptive here when I say this, Dan, even though I know a lot of your market is for, the East Coast and the striper scene, guys in the Florida boys and all these other things, like these are all applicable in all these other places as well. Like, Dave was on earlier, made some nice little comments, but Dave's saying, he goes, another thing is Dan's stuff lasts, I have some bucktails of him that have to be 20 years old.
Oh,
that's a nice testament, Dave. And the fact that you haven't lost it. That's a nice comment. I mean, I think
yes, it is.
Guys, listen, here's the thing. So I told you earlier, I don't sell anything. Dan does. He's got a company. You can go look at all the different styled heads. To be honest with you, one of the things that I'm going to wind up buying is some of the weight forward Spro heads. Actually, some of the bullet heads. I don't have anything. I don't have anything like that. So I kind of want to buy some of those weight forward bullet heads. But just if you're a jig, like I said, if you're a jig maker and you want to tinker around, because there's two different options, right, Dan? They can either buy them pre-painted or they can buy them just naked, as I call it, bare lead.
Yeah, or dressed with whatever.
Or dressed with whatever, Yeah, I mean, it's some fantastic stuff. I know we covered those two, the two bucktails and the colors. I want to talk about the spoons a little bit too, Dan.
Okay.
So you got a couple of style spoons, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you want to talk about these a little bit?
Sure.
What are the styles of spoons you have, and what's the function of them? What is the purpose behind them?
Well, the ones I call peanuts,
I got one.
It's a do-it jigging spoon. Okay, that's very effective on stripers. Pretty good on bluefish too. It's basically got the profile, the rough shape of peanut bunker.
Yeah.
And for you guys that don't know, peanut bunker is probably the most prolific forage fish in salt water the world over. Menhaden is what they call their true name is. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, up until now, I've been selling those only chrome plated. I'm getting ready to put some out with different paint schemes, and I'm also going to list them as bare lead, like a lot of the bucktails.
Nice. I think that size jig head, I call it jig. This size spoon is just fantastic, right? You can the guys on the Great Lakes use these spoons as well too. And you know, the other function for these too is a lot of the walleye guys like the spoons as well. You know, but these are, what do you call these? These are the peanut bunkers, right, Dan?
Peanut, yeah. Peanut.
These are great. And hey, if you're a DIYer at home, guys, if you're a jig maker and you're interested in the spoons, the nice thing about the smaller sizes, I mean, there's lots of ways to paint things, but this is still a size that you can dip, even if you're only managing things out of, you know, your cups and stuff like that. You can dip this size and still get away with painting that way. So you got the peanut bunkers, and then you also have the minnow spoons. What do you call these?
Bluefish busters.
Bluefish busters.
Yeah.
Right.
You got to call them something. So
they got to be something, right? So talk about these a little bit, Dan.
Okay.
And these and the sizes too.
Yeah. 3 sizes, 3/4 ounce, 1 ounce, and 1.5, and 2 different versions, the fat and the skinny. Again, I'm going to do the same thing with these. They're available now in both chromed or a variety of paint schemes, but I'm also going to list them soon as bare lead. Hold one of those up horizontal for a second, Mike. Let me point something out on all of these things.
Doesn't matter which one, Dan?
Doesn't matter. Either one.
Let's do the fat.
Yeah. Stretch the tail out. Okay. To be honest with you, as these things are delivered, the tail is probably too long. Okay. I usually wind up trimming mine. Okay.
Maybe about there. I
Yeah,
don't know,
too much tail on there is going to snub the action of the spoon itself.
But you know what though, Dan? I'm gonna tell you something, and this is no different than like when I give my friends jigs, you know, that I make. I always tell them, I'm like, they're like, oh, the weed guard's too long or the skirt's too long. I go, well, yeah, and you can cut it however the heck you want.
Yeah.
I think that you know, some people will sit there and say, I personally like the longer action because some people will try and add plastics on to varying things. I fish a lot of things without trailers. I mean, you get a bucktail trailer, you don't need anything else on there, right? You just don't.
Not on those, but like I say, I advise trimming them, and I usually do it on the water, basically using a pocket knife and just strip it. Ask your wife or girlfriend how to curl a ribbon on a package.
You know, it's and
use a knife blade to do that. Not too sharp, of course, but it curls the hair at the same time. Shortens it and curls it.
You know, it's so funny you say that, Dan, because he's still in chat. I don't know if you saw me highlight the name earlier. On the Fly Tackle, my buddy from up in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
So Brian had told me that I don't know, sometime over the last year. He always he taught me a few little tips about he said the same thing. Ask somebody you know about curling a ribbon. You know, the same technique with the scissors, like we used to do making presents and putting presents together and stuff. And so it's a great little tip because it really helps, and you can change the profile action and all that type of stuff and on the water tinkering. And that's let me say this too, Dan, and you know this. I think the thing is we always get hung up on like you know, possibly what other people are doing or techniques or styles or exact colors. And like anything else, you have to make things your own sometimes, right? And it doesn't mean you have to make things drastically different, but you have to be willing to say it's not the exact same thing and it's going to fish, right? But there's different little nuances of things that people and techniques and retrieve styles. Like as an example, Anthony's saying, how do you fish those busters? So hey Anthony, are you talking about like the longer bluefish busters like this? You're talking about the fat and then the skinny. I think the skinny was the other one I held up. You're talking like this, Anthony? I believe he is. Dan, what's your opinion on technique for fishing these?
Well, they're basically a swimming lure, so it's it's a cast and retrieve kind of thing. I generally fish them. I'll cast them out, let them sink to whatever depth I want, and on the retrieve, like any slab spoon, they're going to want to ride up in the water column, and sometimes on the retrieve, I'll simply stop and let them resink. The whole point is to be mimic an erratic bait fish, one that's being pursued or injured or whatever.
Let me show one more thing here too, Dan. I mean, and you know this already. So guys, see what's going on here? This isn't me holding it cockeyed. It's
got a curve intentionally.
It's got a curve intentionally. So keep in mind here. So the deal with these guys, and these are available on their link down below. Dan knows this because I said this earlier before we started the show tonight. I'm going to make my comment about the comparable to this. So what this does by having this bent is it changes the action of it. And the reality is you can bend it yourself to change some of the action, right? And the one thing I'm going to say about a bait like this is for anyone, if you're a freshwater guy and you happen to know Eric Hadia, and you'll see Eric crushing walleye on spoons like this, right? And then also, not right now he's down in Florida smashing fish, doing the same type of thing. But the thing is, what's valuable about this is I don't know what it is on the site, on your site, Dan. Let's call it $5, right? You could go and get a nice heavy duty hook, a great spoon, good paint job, right? And if you wanted to buy a hoagie epoxy spoon, like epoxy spoons are, if you're a freshwater person and you don't know the saltwater scene, the hoagie epoxy spoon is like a classic, and there's so many others out there now. A 1 ounce spoon or a 7/8 or whatever the goofy size that they have, it's $10, right? So the point I'm making is you could go and you could be 2 for 1 compared to some of your epoxy spoons that, maybe somebody's going to tell me to make the case that because of the, it might get a little more flash because of the epoxy resin and everything else put over it. Sure. Sounds good. But what I'll tell you is I'd rather take 2 functional spoons where I know and could learn. You don't even have to have it right the first time. You can start manipulating that spoon yourself, and you could change the action on it. You can learn fit and function of how to use these spoons effectively. And to be honest with you, if you're a largemouth bass guy, one of the hottest things going in the bass world is people learning how to use spoons and casting spoons and jigging spoons to chase after bass. And that's happening from the south all the way up north. So if you're not on the game, you should be. And if you want in, you can get pre-made ones all dressed up already from Dan, or you could, as he's saying, you're saying in the future, you're going to make them available, just the spoons, the blanks themselves, right, Dan? So you have options.
Absolutely. Not to rain on your parade here, Mike, but
what did I say wrong?
No, I wouldn't get too carried away with trying to bend those after they've been painted.
That is true.
Or the chrome plated version, because the paint and or plating it's not going to agree with the bend.
That is a good comment. And when I said that, you guys, I misspoke a little because I'm thinking about myself, because I make these too. And so you could bend soft lead basically, right?
Yeah.
But after you go through some of this process, you're not going to be able to do some of those things. And like, as an example, like striper Striper Hunter, you made a good comment. You can bend it over a dowel. Some guys have made their little makeshift little jigs to that they will use to try. And I have a friend actually that uses a pair of vice grips that he has set at the exact setting that he wants to bend his a little bit, and he's got it on a piece of wood that he glued it into. I'm like, really? I'm like, you don't need to do that. But so Dave made a good comment here. Epoxy jigs don't have the density of Dan's jigs. You can cast Dan's jigs a mile, right? And I think they're just they're not. I mean, a lot of guys aren't using epoxy jigs for casting in retrieval, horizontal retrieval, much heavier than 1 ounce. I'm not saying that's a rule, but I just think that 1 ounce size in the epoxy jig is kind of, guys may go more than that, but not that much, right? So all right, so MR says, Dan, you're doing any fishing shows this year?
Well, I stopped doing fishing shows a couple of years ago. Getting a little too old to be dragging all those crates of lead in and out of those places. The only show I'm doing this year is Surf Day on the 18th of February. And I'll be there. I won't be selling, but I'll be doing demonstrations and basically showing the equipment, which I think is going to surprise some guys. It's a lot simpler and cheaper than it needs to be. Some guys get carried away with it. You don't have to spend that much money to get into it. So,
it's funny you say that, Dan. And guys, anyone who's listening or you have listened in the past, you guys, people, you get a vibe for the person you're dealing with on a podcast, right? So
sure.
People have been around. You guys know what I think about things, and I just think that being economical is important sometimes too. And sometimes I put things out that look like Rolls Royces and Cadillacs, and other times it's like, I just want a bare jig, like I don't need fancy in my life sometimes. But it's interesting Dan says that, because you guys, I'm going to tell you, if you're not a tire, right, but you're interested in everything, so you got two different options. One, you could just learn about jigs. It's important to know what you're buying from other people. It's important to understand different elements of jigs. But even if you want to get started, the point of entry is super easy. And I have a Renzetti vise, guys. It's a nice vise, but I'm going to tell you something. You know what? Dan says it when I'm tying bigger jigs and stuff like that and things like that. I kid you not. I have two $25 to $40 vices that I use just as much as I use a fancy one. So if you're a bass jig guy, or especially if you're a striper jig guy, and you're building bigger things or bucktails, you don't need next level stuff. And if you want to try, the only way you learn how to do something is by trying. Dan can tell you all day. I could tell you all day, and it's not gonna set in until you learn how to lock down bucktail, right? Or learn how to lock down other material, and that's it's got to be easy, right? It can't be hard. Inexpensive vise, buy some unpainted jigs. You pick up some thread, right? You get advice from your friends of what you should use or what you shouldn't. Sometimes you can even go to the hobby store and pick up stuff there. I have a friend down in Florida that ties for some of the top charter captains in the world. And, well, let's just say he's not using what everyone else uses. Okay. There's different things you could do to get into the point of entry. And to be honest with you, if anyone ever needs anything, if you message me, I'll even talk to you on the phone and try and help you out with what I know, or get in touch with Dan or anyone else. The reality is, allow yourself to be vulnerable, acknowledge you don't know everything, and be around other people. That's the whole point of Jig Squad. And there's a lot of good people on here that would probably help other people out too. Dan, you and I were talking a little bit about hooks. So the debate of hooks, you talked it a little bit about when you're talking about your bullet head, right?
Right.
And the hook you're using on that.
Mm-hmm.
We had a very brief little conversation. We talked about the new I don't know what to call it. Basically about the guys that lock things down. You know, let's talk about this a little bit, guys. So listen, the reason we're going to talk about this is because this has to do with, and you freshwater boys better pay attention too, because this has to do with you, the boat flippers, and you guys know how I feel about that. But I just think Dan's going to talk about something. I want you to think about how that applies to your fishing. And we're basically talking about the line diameter that we're using, and is it necessary? Go ahead, Dan. Let's talk about this.
Well, one of the biggest improvements in fishing the past few years has been super braid lines. You get phenomenal strength in a very small diameter. And some guys have now gotten into the habit of locking down their drags. Okay. You've got stronger reels now that can tolerate that sort of thing. You've got stronger line now. The next weak link is the hook itself.
Right.
Okay. So some of these guys should back off a little bit and try playing a fish instead of horsing it. And they'll wind up with fewer bent hooks, straightened out hooks. I don't generally get that complaint. I've had it once in the past 10 years. And it was a situation where I should have seen the probability coming. You'll notice most of my stuff, there's either short shank hooks used or very little of the hook shank exposed outside of, unsupported. There's a very good reason for that. Two of them, actually. It leaves more of whatever plastic you're using free to move in the water, free to wiggle. And the other is a shorter shank hook is less prone to bending.
Less leverage by the fish.
So that's it.
It's funny because so I've talked about that on the show before about the leverage and the shorter shank, Dan. But you just made a great comment, which is probably the number one reason that we don't talk about that often, is that a shorter shank hook allows you to have more action on your trailer and plastic that you're using in the water. And that's a big deal, right? It's a big deal. Now, I actually had a friend tell me one time, well, I'm trying to get less action. I go, you absolutely are not trying to get less action. You absolutely are not, because they were using it as a swim jig during the summer. I'm like, you're not trying to get less action. But it's just such a great point to talk about. And you guys, and I'm not knocking any of you. If you like to lock your drag down and you like to swing for the fences and use 600-pound braid, I don't care. Do your thing. It doesn't matter. But just remember, for every person out there that fishes, somebody that fishes the other way. And I think that's why we get these debates on the forums sometimes, or wherever the heck it is, or just maybe it's with your club or the guys you're going to fish the beach with, or we're going on a fishing trip with, whatever it is. It's just there's different ways to do things. The only thing I'll say, and I know Dan's going to back me up on this, is that just like all talking about, just be willing and encourage other people to be willing to listen to other people's ways of doing things, right? So I know I took my little crack saying 200-pound braid, and I know, but the thing is, it's no different when it comes to jig design than it is to tackle and techniques. We have to respect each other out here, but we have to be willing to listen. We don't learn unless we're willing to try some different things. And you guys know how this goes. Dan's been around a while. Dan says, hey, listen, other people could talk about these other strategies, but no one's going to change my mind on this because I've experimented and done so many different things. He's steadfast in some of his value bases on some of these things, and that's good. But he put in the time to have that opinion. And I think it's just real interesting. Like, we should listen to other people and soak in their knowledge. So like in Dan's case, he's been doing this all this time, and it's just something to consider. You may have another buddy that talks about, why you go with the line you do. Okay. It's good. It's just, the value base here is that you take advantage of people's ideas and thoughts, because you become a better design. If you're a jig maker, you become a better designer when you listen to other people's opportunities. I don't care if it's a crappie jig or a walleye jig or a striper jig for a bucktail from off the beach. we have to learn from each other. Otherwise, we're just keeping our lives simple. And to be honest with you, if you're watching this, you're only watching it because you like jigs. We don't talk about other fluff. This is all jigs, and it's the only show like it on podcast platform or videocast platform. So let me see. I always miss things once in a while. So I always miss things. If I missed your comment, if you ask it again, I apologize. So Dorkfish Tackle says, here's a good question. What's Dan's favorite color to tie?
Oh, that's easy. White.
White.
Yeah, you don't have to do anything else with it.
You don't have to do anything else. Isn't that the truth? If
you know,
had a second color, what would it be?
When it comes to colored bucktail, okay, the process of dyeing bucktail changes the hair, changes the characteristics of it. And every guy I know that ties will tell you the same thing. Black is the worst of all.
It's the worst.
Yeah, I have yet to find a good black tail. I just don't like the way that the hair is. It just hasn't the same qualities that I'm looking for in bucktail. Okay, chartreuse is a good one. You go to the Chesapeake and the striper guys will tell you if it ain't chartreuse, it ain't no use. Yeah. All right. So chartreuse is a very popular color. If you're looking for a weak fish or speck or whatever, it's going to be pink. I usually buy my colored tails already dyed, but occasionally it becomes necessary for me to dye my own. I don't like doing it. It's time consuming and messy. And it smells.
Yeah.
But I will do it when necessary. But again, white, I buy hundreds of tails at a time. Some guys ask me where I get them. I tell them, well, I could tell you, but they won't sell them to you unless you're buying hundreds at a time. And, I'm not being sarcastic. I'm telling them the truth.
Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you what, every time I think about other colors and designs and everything else, and I go, okay, how can I design something with white in it? Maybe a little something else added in.
Yeah. Well, white is the universal color,
Yeah. Greg, aka Hook Life says, do you have a preference on a brand for braid? He has his own, but I'm mostly a freshwater guy these days. What do you like for braid for the salt there, Danny?
Well, I don't like. I can't even think of what the name of it is now.
There's a lot of them out there. There's a lot are good.
There's one in particular that I don't like on spinning reels. I just get too many wind knots and mysterious break-offs. Just spontaneously breaks.
Yeah. I mean,
good. I like that.
Yeah. On the Fly says, and this is a good point too. You can't dye the blacktail too dark. It's almost got to be like a light black, and that is real. That's a good comment too. I actually, Dan, funny enough, one show I had brought up, I had said, the analogy I was using was like t-shirts, right? And so when they dye t-shirts, just the pigments has a different effect on how the material feels in the same exact brand. You find a little t-shirt place that you like that has cheap t-shirts, which I love. I love t-shirts. I have a little place I get them for $3 something a piece online, right? For standard white t-shirts. But you get a colored shirt, and all of a sudden it feels different because the weight of the pigment is different. And anyone who powder paints out there will tell you that too, right? That the pigments from in powder paint, you're going to get a different effect depending on, whether it's the temperature, the humidity. One day you're just rocking and rolling with the white, and then the next you're just like, it's not working as well, or it could be the black.
Yeah.
You have to make adjustments, right?
That's right.
That's a thing.
Yeah, absolutely. With the powder paint, every color is different, reacts differently. Green and chartreuse are the easiest. And then when you get to vinyl spray, which I use a lot of, all my accent colors are vinyl spray. The hardest one to use there is green.
Is it really?
Yeah. If you get it, if you get it mixed in the jar thick enough to where it sprays and covers well, it's going to be too thick. So you have to thin it out, and you wind up putting 2, 3, 4 coats on, and you run the risk of drips and runs and too much paint and all that sort of stuff. You know, it's all these things have their ups and downs. So
yeah, you got to tinker around with it, you know. All right, so Matt's asking, Matt, this is a good question because he does have this. So any blurple colored bucktails?
Absolutely.
Yeah. You guys, I love that color. I love blurple, to be honest with you. I really like it at night. To be one of my favorite things to do is if I'm actually, I've used it probably more for snook and other stuff like that off the beaches. But to be honest with you, I like it at night, just because, you know, a darker color at night.
That's the
I actually like. I really like that blurple colored SP minnow too. You know, I love that thing in the evenings, right? But that's in the salt, and I don't get to do that all the time. But blurple's a great color bucktail.
Yep.
Hey, talk about wine a little bit. I want to hear your take on wine for the salt, like wine colored bucktails.
I sell a lot of them.
You do. You sell a lot of them.
And again, the guy that turned me onto it was John Skinner.
John Skinner.
Yep. And the first time I made them was just before one of the surf day shows that John was at. And we were partway into the show, and I was walking around, and I stopped to talk to John for a minute, and he mentioned that he was looking at my wine bucktails, and I said, "Are they correct?" I said, "Is the color right?" And he says, "Yeah." So a confirmation from the guy that invented it, as far as I'm concerned. So,
Danny,
I do make a lot of those.
Okay. David, are you talking about like the bucktails and stuff like that for albies? Yeah, I mean, the guys, I mean, our guys, what's the predominant thing? I could tell you this, the spoons are definitely an albie killer. Right? I mean, what would you say on the bucktails, Dan? I mean, I guess I'm going to be honest with you, David. I don't fish for them enough to be able to answer that.
I would stick with those bluefish busters for albacore.
Yeah, the spoons are just killer. Yeah,
chrome plated, even without dressing on them, just rip them through the water as fast as you can. You can't outrun an albie with the on a retrieve.
You cannot outrun an albie. Isn't that true? I mean,
it's them and Spanish mackerel.
Spanish max.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, all I know is the scream of an albie taking off. It's just otherworldly. That first run, actually the first and the second from an albie are just otherworldly. Like I'll never forget the first albie I ever hooked. On a medium heavy spinning rod, which I guess you could go a little lighter if you had to, but I hooked it and I sat there, and within the first 3 seconds I go, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose this fish. And it is such an adrenaline rush. If you have a chance in your life to fish for albies, you have to do it, because it's just it's an extraordinary thing.
Yeah.
A lot of guys are saying in chat, Dan, Super Slick for braid. Yeah, Super Slick's great. I still use the old school Power Pro, but Super Slick's good too. You know.
Yeah, there you are. That's the one I don't like. Power Pro.
Which one? The Power Pro?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yes, Matt, you're saying or John Lee's saying they chew up the hair a lot. Yeah. Bassin with Big Malone talking about the color of black buzzbait at night. Big Malone, I'll tell you something. When I get in a river smallie fishing, there's 2 colors I go with if I'm wading: white and black. I go with white and black twister tails on jig heads, usually unpainted, and I have a white and black buzzbait with me, a small little 1/8 ounce buzzbaits that I'll use when I'm wading the river, and that's all I go with. I've got it down to, that's my happy place, you know. All right, so Surf Day is a big deal for you, Dan, because it's coming up. You're really excited about it. You're not going to be vending there, but you are going to be tying, demonstrating, doing some stuff, right?
Yep. And basically showing the equipment, showing guys that it doesn't have to be fancy, expensive stuff.
Yes, which is great. I think like I said, the more people we kind of get into this scene, the more friends we have that are kind of around us that are, doing the things that we like to do. And I think having that community is kind of a fun thing. All right, so that's coming up on the 18th. I
Yep.
know that we posted it in chat a little while ago. I just want to take a couple minutes, Dan, and give you a chance to talk about Stripers Online, the forum. You guys have heard me reference it a few times. Dan's referenced it during this show so far tonight. But I want Dan to have a chance to talk about it because for me, Stripers Online has been a tremendous resource for me over the years, and I haven't posted as much there. I did a couple years back when I was making my own casting eggs. I made a few posts and I got involved. My name on Stripers Online is Barracuda8U. And I had made some posts about the eggs that I had found, the wooden eggs, and some things I was trying with magnets instead of the screw to hold on the flies. But anyway, I will make an effort now that I'm doing Jig Squad, and this is a thing, right, to contribute a little bit more around there. But it's such a great forum. I know you and I spoke, and you wanted to talk about it a little bit, and then some of these people that have been involved in the scene. So let's start with Online a little bit. Talk a little bit about Stripers Online, Dan.
Um, I stumbled on Stripers Online by accident. I don't even remember how far back now.
Yeah.
And I was on it for a while, and finally there was a guy doing bucktails in the commercial section,
Okay.
and basically he was making one bucktail style only. It was a long sand deal style. Just for the fun of it, I'll show you this.
Oh my goodness. Look
Okay,
at that.
that's a fish hair tail on. Okay, and I sold a
Wow.
few of these. They're no good in the surf. The problem is they get tumbled in the wash, and this stuff gets all tangled up, and you can't undo it. But anyway, um, after that fellow dropped out, I approached Tim to ask if I could sell in the commercial section, and then he, gave me permission to do it, and I agreed to his terms, and still do. I've been there a long time. Occasionally, I overstep my bounds, and he brings me back to center. And it's been a good exposure. It gives me exposure to a lot of guys, and it allows me to sell a few things. And I hope it's been good for Tim because it's been good for me too. The website
Sure.
itself, his particular philosophy is he doesn't want to tell you where to fish. He wants to tell you how to fish. The whole point
Yeah.
is to be educational, and I think it meets that goal.
It's a
So
good comment. I don't know Tim myself. I know the name from on there just from seeing it over the years. And like I said, I owe the community a little, interaction a little bit. To be honest with you, over the years, I was always intimidated because I wasn't a striper guy. But I feel like I've been around the jig game for a long time, and I feel I've earned my keep. So I'm going to try and interact around there a little bit more. Tremendous value from so many different people on that forum, and so if you're somebody that's not on Stripers Online, you should go, make an account. It's a great forum. They keep the nonsense off of there. They just do. I personally have found it to be pretty rewarding to me. I'll be honest, I'm going to say it. Every night before I go to bed, I hop into bed and that's what I do. I peruse Stripers Online. It's just this is the only thing I do, and I'm asleep 15 minutes later. So I don't mean that in a bad way, but that's my preferred thing to do, to go and look and see all the content that's being created there. So it's a cool place. I really enjoy it. Like I said, you guys, I have no connections with Stripers Online. It's just my job is to tell you stuff I like and to be honest around here. And like I said, no one's paying the bills around here. I'm sitting in our bedroom right now in the Murphy household doing this. So, but that's Stripers Online. Now, I know another thing too, Dan. I know you talked about you wanted to throw a shout out to a few designers, right? A few guys that have been part of the scene for a while. John was one of them, but go ahead. Talk about the guys you wanted to shout out a little bit. Make sure you talked about that.
Well, there's a couple other guys that do what I do, and we get along fairly well and trade lies back and forth, uh, and a few secrets. Jerry Melia from the Old Man's Tackle Box. I make stuff basically up to 4 or 5 ounces, and he starts where I stop. He's more of a deep water guy, and he makes jigs and bucktails and stuff up to 2 pounds. Believe it or not. Have you ever seen an ultra minnow at 32 ounces? Well,
Yeah,
he makes them. So
that's much more that I need, but that I get it. That's interesting, right?
yeah,
Guys will use it.
you get ideas from a lot of people. Nobody has a monopoly on ideas. I certainly don't. And sometimes people will just mention something and it gets you to thinking, and you go off on a tangent and you come up with something else. But
Yeah, isn't that the truth?
yeah, there's a lot of good people in this business. So
there really is, Dan. And I mean, I think I just think, like I said, I mean, I made the comment. I just think we need to be honorable and good to each other in this world. And drama is drama, but I'm not interested in it. Dan laughs at me because I told him I just turned 50 2 weeks ago, right? So I turned 50 and I don't have time for the drama. So Dan, you'll laugh at this. So Gators Adventures, he's cracking a joke at me right now. So he says, Kuda, I thought you were moving south. Hurry up and get in the basement. So for anyone who doesn't know what the heck he's talking about. So I'm up in the bedroom, right? So the story with this is that every single time I do a show, I take these 2 pictures down from this wall and I go down to the family room and I take this barracuda off the wall and I bring it up here and I hang it out. And so the Jig Squad lab is down in the basement. And if you see me on Instagram or if you go on Instagram, you'll see I have a few pictures of the lab up down there of, well, the problem is I don't want to move down to the lab for 2 reasons right now. One, it's freezing in Chicago and the basement's cold. 2, the Wi-Fi isn't as good down there. So I need to put another booster down there. And so I do want to do some stuff from downstairs. I tell people I call them Saturday Night Lights and just another show. There are some more Bucktail guys that are going to be coming on the show in the next 6 months that are just, unique and different designers and stuff like that. And there's all different things. There's bass jig makers, crappie jig designers. I've had some of the West Coast, Northwest people making coho jigs and twitching jigs. So there's a little bit of everything. But Dan, I just want to say, I appreciate you tremendously because you've created a support network of people that just speak so highly of you. And to be honest with you, the way I kind of heard about you was from Stripers Online.
You're embarrassing me.
Yeah, but you know what though, Danny? Here's the thing. So I feel that I owe this. I made a decision a while ago. You heard me say I'm not quitting my day job, folks. I am a high school educator. That's what I do. I work at a high school. I'm a husband. I have 3 boys. I am an ambassador for Do It Molds. So like I do stuff with Do It Molds because I make jigs, funny enough, right? But that's just on the side. So I do this for the love of the game and because I want people to be able to hear of these designers that I think are just class acts. I'm not interested in bringing clowns on and people that are belligerent and, all these crazy things. I run a clean show and, everyone knows a good story when you hear it. And Dan is so respected on Stripers Online. Like just people are good to you, and they value your product. You had, what's the fella's name that was in here earlier? He's talking about, the quality of the jigs.
Dave DeHart.
Yeah, Dave DeHart.
I know Dave personally.
Yeah, saying some great stuff. Like here's a question. I don't want to miss questions. Steel Curtain says, what degree hook eye do you use on the weight forward jigs?
60 degrees.
60 degrees, weight forward.
There's basically three different hooks, and they're all Mustad. The 34184, the 34185, and the 32824. There's no secrets there.
Which is the short shank?
The 34185.
5. The 5 is the short sink.
Yeah, the newer one, the 32824, is kind of between the two. The one thing people don't understand, and I must point this out, there's no standardization in the hook business. Okay,
No,
any manufacturer can call any hook whatever size they feel like. All right,
that's true.
the 34184 and 185 are basically the same hook, just the 184 has a longer shank. All right. I prefer the shorter shank for reasons I already mentioned.
Yeah.
But I also wanted a better hook, and I feel that the 32824 on my bullet head jigs fits that description. It's a bigger gap, extends out a little further, and it's a better hook in that application. You got to match your hook to your head.
Yeah, and a good comment about this, and this is my own opinion. I know I have friends in the jig game that sell and own companies, and they don't 100% agree with me on this, but my own opinion is, you shouldn't mind telling people the hooks you use, right? It doesn't. Some people want to try and imitate and replicate your stuff, and I get that happens, but I mean,
Yeah,
you also want to sell your stuff, right? And say, yeah, I use this for a reason. That's because it's this good. And there's a lot more that goes into it, right? So the average Joe isn't going to, pick up and switch things out. But, like to me, let me give you an example. I was at the show and last weekend, right, in Chicago. And here's me going around, right? The guy that makes jigs. And I came upon a vendor and I asked the vendor about what hooks they had. And they said, well, I don't like to say. And I'm thinking, I'm out. I'm like, I'm Jig Squad, dude. I want to know, I want to know the details, right?
Yeah.
But then other guys that I went to and I saw their jigs, you know what I did? There's not a jig out there. Well, maybe not all of them. I can't make bucktails like Dan Brodzinski here, but there's not much I can't make myself. And the thing is, I had a guy from one company, and I went and bought a dozen jigs from him. You want to know why? Because they were cool. He was there. He had a reason. He was able to explain why he designed things the way he did, why he used the amount of material he did, and I liked the jigs. And so I bought them to support other jig makers, right? And those are jigs I didn't have to go make myself. So, Dan, listen, it was an honor to have you on, and I will tell you something.
To be here. I appreciate it very much.
I really, maybe as we get to the summer or something, we'll set something up and do like another night or a little get together, and we can have people come on and ask questions and stuff like that, and just hang out a little bit. I really enjoyed having you. I
enjoyed being here.
Yeah, I've learned a lot from you. And I appreciate it. Your thoughtfulness on your replies, like when you're talking about different jigs, and I see guys on some of the threads and Stripers Online, and they'll say, Dan, I want this, and this. And you're like, okay, message incoming. And just, I know I'm going to be ordering some of those bullet heads and some of the weight forward, ultra minnows, I call them, but more of the bullet heads. So guys, listen, check out Dan's website. It's listed below. Jump on Stripers Online. A lot of cool stuff if you would like to learn more about bucktails. But this has been Jig Squad. So look at John Lee. John Lee throws his last comment out there. He goes, Dan is living the dream. Yeah, trippy. Maybe we'll do that. We'll do like a hook discussion video, and maybe we'll get like a couple different people on, and we can kind of have a little debate. That would be kind of fun. Just something different, and which I'm always up for trying. But Dan, stay in chat here. We're going to end the stream, folks. This has been Jig Squad. Check out other shows. Everything's under the live tab on YouTube, but you can also find Jig Squad after these shows post within 2 days. I put all of the shows in audio format on all the podcasting platforms under the name Jig Squad, but all the video shows for the last year are on here. If you're a striper guy that jumped on here, maybe you'll be interested. I had the No Live Bait Needed guys on about a month plus back. So lots of good stuff out there. And I appreciate you. Dan, don't leave the show, but I'm going to roll the outro. And this has been Jig Squad, folks. So we'll see ya. Let's do I do have an outro somewhere. Where is it? Here we go. Thanks, folks. All right.